Distinguished speakers and guests, sponsors and partners, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And if you've just joined us here, thanks for being with us here at the MIA International Accountants Conference 2022. I'm Ruben Henson, your host for this afternoon and also tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, over the next 2 days, we aim to facilitate connectivity, learning and collaboration. Leading ESG, charting sustainability is the theme for this year's conference. Having said that, we shall begin the concurrent sessions. This is concurrent session 1A, winning the race to a net zero world, which is supported by BDO, BMW and Black Sun for the next 1 hour. Allow me to introduce your moderator, Dr. Nurmazila Datuk Mazan, Independent Non-Executive Director, BIMB Securities, Sendirian Berhad, and joining her, her esteemed panel of speakers, Catherine Bell, Principal, Sustainability, BDO Australia, Sashi Ambi Haipahan, Head of Corporate Communications and Sustainability, BMW, James Whittingham, Sustainability Director from the Black Sun. A quick reminder to delegates, you can join in the conversation with your Q&A via the Slido link on the virtual platform. Each session has a 15-minute allotment for Q&A. Handing you over to your moderator. Have a good session.
Live. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome back to the session on MIE Conference 2022. And I think this morning we've heard a lot about the discussion on ESG and sustainability. And I think the speakers this morning also spoke about, net zero. And today and this afternoon, we're going to discuss more about winning the race to a net zero world. And I'm pleased to share a bit of information and probably a bit of slides for us to jumpstart the discussion. Next. So probably I would like to refresh our memory again on the discussion this morning when we talk about environmental, social, and governance and ESG, which is very important towards sustainability. And within the ESG, there are various areas that we need to take care of. And within, the lake of environment, we talk about greenhouse gas emission, which is one area that we all are talking about this morning, about the report from IPCC and also the effort in mitigating the global warming. And of course, within the lake of environment, it's not just about GHG, it's also about resources used, about energy, water, and land, and also about water production, as well as energy sources, and probably risks from other areas such as deforestation. And in Malaysia, that itself, I think we just actually experience, flood, the impact of flood, and also there's a lot of discussions on food security, and there's also a report on drought that will probably coming to Asia and Southeast Asia. So that's where within the E factor, there are many areas that we have to take care of. And on the second column is about social, something that also have been much discussed about human rights issue, modern slavery. In Malaysia itself, I think we've heard of a few companies. They are public listed companies that do face challenges with labor issue as well. And I think we've also read about a few companies that are not able to actually send to export their products because of labor issues. And of course, governance issue on bribery and corruption, and how the board composition and the strength of the governance and the board actually able to mitigate. And we also heard discussion this morning about Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance that has actually inserted that requirement for public listed companies, for large companies, to ensure that the board and senior management actually make responsible for the governance, especially in the area of sustainability. And again, it is from one company to another, from sector to another sector, your risk would be different. And obviously, we also heard the discussion this morning that from one country to another, we are also facing different intensity in terms of areas of risk. So again, there is one, we don't have one size that fits all. Even the solution may not be one size fits all, but very important that each and every organization, you do the assessment and you assess the risk of the ESG matters into your sustainability agenda. And can we go next? And this also was quoted this morning about 10 global risks by severity and climate action failure and extreme weather and biodiversity losses. Those top three that were spoken about. And of course, there are a few others that we need to take care of. And one thing interesting about this global risk World Economic Forum, I remember reading the one in 2021, and it was stated that the risk of pandemic has been reported in the global risk report almost every year since 2013. And because I think over and over again, we were facing challenges through several pandemic before. It may not be pandemic, but several exposure in terms of virus. For example, we had with problems with swine flu. We were facing with also MERS-CoV and all that. But again, uh, these issues were reported, but we probably have not learned much or have not taken a lot of actions on that. So when it comes to climate, it was reported in, I think, many reports in prior years. But again, the question of how much have we taken actions, and have we taken this report seriously? So it is time now that we put a lot of thoughts and serious considerations on the issues reported in the Global Risk Report 2022. Next slide. So and we've probably have read a lot of this. I won't go through and this very detailed on these slides, but for example, this one thing that I would like to point out on this slide is about the report by the parliament that recent floods caused about 6.1 billion losses. So if you're a SME or publicly listed, I think you'll be very cautious to say, no, my company won't be affected and my business won't be affected. So be very cautious to say things like that. Yeah, because when it comes to climate, we don't have any vaccine for climate. And, when climate impact happen, the physical risk, we probably would have time to see, what next to be done, because it will just wipe out. Next. And this is based on what TCFD has pointed out. And there were conversations on TCFD, which stands for the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure, which was formed by the Financial Stability Board. And this has been a reference document by many organizations and many countries around the world. And in TCFD document, it mentioned about two main risks, which are transition risks coming from perhaps, ineffective policy and legal requirement, and also probably laggard in technology, as well as market response and reputation when it comes to climate. And with regards to physical risk, it can be acute impact to your business and to the societies, as well as chronic impact as well. And this diagram from TCFD also discussed on the opportunities, looking at resource efficiency and exploring energy sources that can help mitigation of carbon emission, and looking at invention or innovation of product and services, educating the market, and building resilience within the society and business. And of course, something that accountants would love to see is actually to look at the financial impact, because I think whatever risk coming from the climate exposure would also impact your income statement, cash flow, as well as your balance sheet. And we also talk about stranded assets within the climate change discussion. And apart from that, there would be opportunities as well for those companies which are able to innovate and explore new ways of addressing and supporting other businesses in this climate agenda. Next slide. And uh, that's where I think a lot of conversation on net zero. Net zero means we try to ensure there would be, additional emission on carbon. If you have, if the company is actually emitting, they, other than finding ways to reduce the emission, they can also look at other aspects like carbon credit, try to offset those emissions. Next. And we also heard from the finance minister this morning about Malaysian commitment to becoming carbon neutral nation by 2050. And also he mentioned about Malaysia aspiration to reduce the carbon emission by 45% of GDP, if I heard it well, by 2030. And I think many of us participants, we are part of Malaysia, and we have to be part of this 12th Malaysian plan, which is Malaysian Development Plan. And we, I think, should be part of the initiatives in achieving this net zero aspiration. And we've seen that our two biggest conglomerate, two biggest giant company like Petronas, has also announced about their net zero carbon emission target by 2050. And Tenaga Nasional Berhad, which is the energy provider in Malaysia, the I would say the sole energy provider in Malaysia, also has set out the target on net zero emission by 2050. So next. So again, I think when the question in terms of how do we reduce carbon, how we go for achieving this target. So these are among those that I think the global community has started to implement. Is first to look at decarbonization, or also to reduce your carbon footprint. If you are not able to put initiative or investment on decarbonization, perhaps you can reduce your carbon footprint individually. If you used to drive, you may want to think about taking public transport, and that kind of thing, try to reduce. And also a lot of companies are looking into carbon credits to offset the carbon emission that they cannot avoid. And the government also has gone into exploring to set up a voluntary carbon market, and we've heard that from the Ministry of Finance this morning. And the other initiative is to go into carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And I think Petronas, our oil company, has actually embarked, and I think they signed agreement with Schlumberger on this CCUS. So initiatives are ongoing, but I believe that more can be done in terms of the decarbonization and net zero. Next. So I think this is very interesting. We also need to know where and which industry actually are within this cycle in terms of, or this big cake in terms of their carbon emission. So based on this diagram or pie chart from our World in Data, uh, a lot of the carbon emission actually came from energy utilization. So, for example, the one in red here, 73.2% is actually coming from energy, and the energy is being used very much in industry, about 24.2%, and for road transport is about 16.2%. Yeah, road transport 11.9. So transport as a whole 16.2. Aviation is about 1.9, and shipping is about 1.7. And energy used in building constitute about 17.5%, and the rest, other type of industries like livestock do constitute about 5.8%, and so on and so forth. So but here we can see that energy utilization, energy usage constitute a large part of the carbon emission. Next. And this is actually the results of a survey recently released by University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. I had a privilege of taking 8-week course on the climate change and net zero. Very very in-depth information that I've managed to obtain through this course. And based on the survey, these actually are the reasons why companies uh, felt it challenging to transit to net zero. One of the one of the reason is lack of capital to finance net zero transition. The next one is lack of reliable and affordable alternative low carbon technologies, lack of price incentive to shift away from carbon intensive business models. For example, they may come out with probably electronic vehicle, but again, it goes back to the customers whether uh, this is the type of product they would like to buy. And lack of regulatory inducement, such as making net zero targets and plans mandatory. I've heard this discussion about making it mandatory because sometimes when we make it voluntary, it takes a very slow progress, yeah, for the whole society and business to move forward. And the fifth reason is lack of sustainable and purposeful vision aligned with net zero to guide the company. And the sixth one is lack of demand from customers, consumers, and clients. And finally, is lack of technical expertise in formulating the transition plan. And these factors rate differently between one sector to another. For example, in oil and gas, you can see that one of the main reasons, where it constitutes about 46% respondents, cited the lack of capital to finance the net zero transition. And I think possibly because of the investment needed in oil and gas, like CCUS is require large capital. Next. So this is the survey that I mentioned from the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership about understanding corporate transition to net zero. And I think this has been released, I think, sometime early this year. And the results are quite recent as well. And I actually have crafted a few of the results to just show the kind of implementation initiatives based on sectors that hopefully this information can assist the audience if you are coming from different sectors in terms of what are the initiatives and how have we progressed as a global community. Next. So in oil and gas, these are among the initiatives in terms of effort, like looking at low carbon fuels like biofuels, hydrogen, biomethane, improving detection and reduction of methane leaks. I think they do use drones as technology, adopting enhanced oil recovery techniques using carbon capture, utilization, and storage, shifting to renewable energy supply, and change in resource produce and refine. So the big, one of the big initiative is to shift to low carbon fuels like hydrogen or biofuels. Next. And as far as power generation sector, the one of the big initiative is to shift to renewable energy supply in Malaysia. I think we're all very familiar about using solar-based energy. And the second initiative is R&D in battery storage technology, demand side response optimization, accelerating coal to gas switch, retrofitting coal and gas fired power plants with CCUS, and shifting to nuclear power. And next, I'm just going through very quickly because of the time. I think in steel sector, it's very interesting that they're doing all these, at the same percentage, using coal, scrap-based electronic furnace, improving material efficiency, and hydrogen-based direct reduced iron facilities. And finally, next slide on aviation, cement sector, like increasing blending of alternative materials. I think this is interesting because in Malaysia, cement sector is also quite big, especially among the SMEs. Improving energy efficiency usage within the factory, developing technology for direct electrification of cement kilns, and accelerating thermal energy shift from coal to waste fuels, improving energy provided by sustainable biomass, renewable waste, and hydrogen, and fossil fuel combustion equipped with CCUS. And biomass is also one of those technology that have been used by by factories in Malaysia. I've had conversation with a few companies that have actually used biomass. Next, aviation. I think this is the last one. Is about improving aircraft or airport operational efficiency, accelerating the use of sustainable aviation fuels or SAFs. I think this is one of the conversation we had among the sustainability practitioners. R&D in advanced propulsions, such as using hydrogen-powered or hybrid electric aircraft and improving air traffic management. So I think my intention is to give the audience some sort of feel in terms of what are the initiatives that companies globally have taken in terms of trying to reduce carbon or decarbonization and trying to achieve the net zero target. So uh, with that, I think let's go and speak to our uh, panel speakers this afternoon, and they came from various background. We have Sashi from BMW. I think would be very interesting to hear his thoughts on transportation and automotive, and also James from Black Sun, based in UK, and Catherine from BDO, based in Australia. So welcome all of you, and thank you very much for joining this session.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. For me.
All right. Thank you. So probably the first thing, let's hear from each of you in terms of how your organization work around this issue of climate change and net zero, and what is your role within the organization. Perhaps we start with ladies first. Catherine?
Wow, thank you very much. So yeah, it's twofold for BDO. Obviously, it's our internal approach to net zero, and BDO did, I think late last year, announce that it was committed to net zero alongside a number of other global financial institutions. And so we are very much on the journey as well in terms of understanding what our emissions profile is across our global organization, which is in 167 different countries. So we have set up a net zero advisory committee at our global level, and we've got our board level firms on that to help understand how we are going to not only measure and monitor our emissions across our global firm, but also then what are we going to do about actually reducing those emissions, because there's a level of change management, behavioural change that's going to be attached to that. So that's on the internal side of what BDO is doing as a business. For me, I lead the sustainability practice here in Western Australia, and we are focused on building carbon management programs for companies here, and we focus around the heavy emitting industries such as mining, oil and gas, because this is just becoming such a key strategic imperative, and it's quickly sort of being advanced to the leadership and around boards that emissions is just going to have to be part of that conversation. So we're building expertise, teams, services to address this. What's going to come, I believe, very quickly. And so that we need to use technology. I think it's data that we're working with here, and ultimately, yeah, it's technical as well. So it's trying to also educate not only our own business but our our clients as well around not only the risks around not addressing emissions management, but actually what are the, there's a real opportunity here. This is transformation. So this is where we get to the fun stuff and look at this, what's actually being unearthed from this transition.
Yep, thank you, Catherine. And I think it's very interesting later on. We shall hear from you about your experience with mining and steel companies. But now let's hear from Sashi from Automotive. And I think BMW has released their fleet, which is fully electronic. So over to you, Sashi.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, as part as a global direction for the BMW Group, and this is practiced all over the world. We're one of the first German automotive companies to actually join the business ambition for the 1.5 degrees campaign that's by the Science Based Target Initiative. Now, this initiative, so we're in the race, yeah. So we're in the race not just for prizes like in automotive championships, like touring cars, but I think we are trying to get our numbers down to zero in terms of to protect the environment, yeah, in terms of CO2 emissions. And this race, I think, is important not just for the automotive industry, which you saw in those charts earlier. A large part of that is actually the commercial vehicle side, but I think passenger vehicles, and I think when you think about emissions, and when you think about carbon dioxide and global warming and all these things, you think about a vehicle that's on the street, that's emitting all these smoke and gas and whatsoever. So I think as part of that industry, I think we feel responsible that we need all over the world to not just be responsible in the way we introduce our cars, the new technologies in vehicles, but at the same time, how we produce these cars. And joining these initiatives worldwide with other organizations like-minded organizations, I think worldwide is actually very important for us to hit this ambition. Yeah, and it's not something that it's top down, but that means coming from our headquarters to our markets, but it's also bottom up and industry wide. So in our direction and heading in that space, you'd see us working with organizations that you'd never imagine us working with. Yeah, we're working with our competitors. Yeah, we're working with organized car companies from other parts of the world as well, because I think this challenge, it's not a competitive one, but it's more of a collaborative one. And I think this is the message when we speak about sustainable development and sustainability and building technology that's responsible. And innovation and technology, I think that's the direction that we are going with. BMW is a innovative car company. We're in the world of technology, and we feel that technology is actually the solution that will help us with all these challenges with the environment and in social in areas. Yeah.
Yep. So James, it's very interesting. I think there's so much development in the UK and as well as the EU as well, with regards to climate change and net zero. And I think Black Sun has been very much an advocate in this space. So perhaps James, you can share with us in terms of the effort as well as the progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks very much. So I guess just in terms of context, we are a relatively small business compared to my other panelists. We're a strategic communications agency. We're headquartered in London with around 100 colleagues based there. and around a further 20 in our Singapore office. So quite, I guess you would describe this as an SME, a small and medium-sized enterprise. So day to day, our footprint is pretty small. Largely, our carbon footprint will be based around the building emissions that we have in terms of our direct GHGs. But we recognize that we have a role to play and that we need to improve our efforts. And so we're right now in the process of forming a working group to help us address not only our greenhouse gas emissions, but our wider ESG impacts. And we see that as a means to not only engage the people who are already working with us, but hopefully to recruit and attract the best talent, and they want to work for an organization that takes these issues seriously. So in light of being essentially a communications strategic agency focused on reporting, websites, disclosure, etc., a lot of our biggest impact really is the advice that we give to our clients. And we work with some of the biggest names in the FTSE 100. That's sort of the leading list of shares, blue chip companies here in the UK, but obviously many have an international presence. So people like Diageo, Tesco, Vodafone, etc. So a lot of our work is around reporting and advisory, whether that be in sustainability, annual reporting, websites, etc. But certainly we've seen an explosion in the demand and the support that is sort of being requested from clients around climate change, net zero type reporting and disclosure. And I guess that's been driven in part, TCFD has already been mentioned. Obviously our own now sort of ex or retired Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, was one of the instrumental people in creating, I think, the FSB, or certainly banging the drum for greater climate disclosure in or from listed businesses. And TCFD has really taken or kicked up a gear or two this last year. So a lot of the UK businesses are December year ends. And so they're putting out all of their annual reports, typically in March and April. And the volume and the increased amount of information that is out there around climate risk is really, really quite substantial. And I've got some other remarks that I can make later with regards to put some numbers for your audience about the requirements and the fact that net zero now is almost everywhere. I think PwC did a survey, as they do on a regular basis. They review the FTSE 350 on a regular basis, and the word of the year about 3 years ago was stakeholders. That was everywhere, and that was partly driven by changes to the Company Act around Section 172, which is about giving due recognition to stakeholders and involving them in the decision-making process within the organisation. And the impacts that the organisation has upon them and society more generally. And I suspect the word of the year when PwC do their next round of reviews of the corporate reporting world, I imagine that net zero, TCFD, climate change, climate risk will be high up that agenda.
Yep, thank you. And definitely, I think reporting and disclosure is very, very important. And but before that, a lot of questions as well by companies whom I've engaged with in terms of where do we start. So perhaps Catherine, I would like, maybe you can share with us in terms of where do they start and how do they progress, especially the clients you have worked with, at probably to the least at individual level. We try to do carbon accounting, looking at carbon footprint, but for companies, I'm sure there are a few things that they need to start on in terms of capturing the data on their carbon emission. I think you're muted.
I am.
Yeah.
Wasn't fast enough. Sorry. Thank you. Listen, carbon. Some say it's a new liability on the balance sheet or the new asset. So, but it's like anything. What you can measure, you can manage. So, obviously, the first point of call is really just understanding what your your emissions profile is, and I guess, starting with, scope 1 and scope 2, and then the challenge really is around scope 3, which is those indirect your supply chain emissions, which is going to be the challenge, but will be increasingly asked for by the market, because that's where, for many companies, where the majority of your emissions do lie. So I think there's the simplistic answer here is, there's no right or wrong approach. The right approach is just to start. It's an educational process as well that I think that companies have to invest some time internally socializing what this actually means to the business and why it's important, because it does have, it's not just another simple change management exercise. This has larger implications for the business and potentially its operating model, its business model. So depending upon the organization and the industry it is in, will obviously vary. Given we're a consulting company, we're predominantly people-based, we have a lesser impact as such. We don't have a large GHG emissions profile, but ultimately we still do need to educate our own people, and do our best to as well educate our clients around advising them about what's ahead and the risks of not measuring this new liability. So I think the first step really is education, and then putting in a plan in place to start measuring and understanding what that looks like. And then what comes is the strategy around that, around what you can do in terms of low-hanging fruit and then medium to long term. But it is really going to require companies to do a risk assessment around what their emissions exposure is, because it's going to start hitting the balance sheet before too long.
Yep. Yeah. So obviously, risk assessment is very, very important, as also recommended by TCFD. To include climate into your strategy, and also to carry out scenario plans in the event that the global warming move over 1.5 degrees Celsius, and to capture that scenarios into your annual report, your integrated report, and look at the impact. Yeah. So, but it's very interesting. I've been in a workshop with quite a number of SMEs, as well as some companies, probably some of those medium sized but listed. And it was very interesting, where during that conversation we were given the Excel spreadsheet, where the moderator or the mentor requested us to actually look at our electric bills, and try to convert that to carbon equivalents, as well as looking at all other activities and converting it to carbon equivalents. But there was discussion and also debate, I think those from probably engineering and different background, obviously, about what measure do you use in converting electricity usage from kilowatt to carbon baseline carbon measure. But Sashi, I would probably want to hear the journey and the experience from BMW, because I think your organization has been in this journey for quite some years now. As you mentioned, is starting from 2003. So
Yeah.
can you just share with us how's your journey in the BMW?
Sure. And I think in answering that question and sharing a little bit, I'll circle back to what Catherine said. And I think doing an audit of the whole business process and finding where those carbon numbers are, and the emissions, and where those emissions are coming from, it's actually the first step. And there's no hard and fast rule how to do it. But for us at BMW, what we did was, so the strategy that we're seeing now and moving forward into 2030 and 2050, it was actually something that started very earlier on. And we were very, very mindful in terms of how important this was. So in calculating, basically we just did the simple thing as calculating our carbon footprint. Yeah, I think you've heard that line so many times over the years, that what's your carbon footprint, and that's the simplest way we did things. And in doing so, we also when we audited ourselves, we also published this as a sustainability report, yeah, that we have every year. Like what you have in terms of an annual report, it's a sustainability report that we actually been having now over more than a decade now. Yeah, it's about 15, 16 years already. And without fail, this document is published, and it's very transparent in terms of the numbers in our entire business chain. Yeah. Now, moving forward, this document or this audit process has enabled us to craft strategies for us to actually build cars where, in terms of emission, like every new car that we built, was built on the basis of so much more reduced CO2. Yeah, not just in terms of the emissions from the car, but in the process of building the vehicle. Yeah. And then, of course, moving the innovation from traditional combustion engines into electric vehicles, and then exploring new technologies further into the future that can help us reduce that CO2 number drastically. Yeah. And this also allows us to set like some realistic targets, in terms of how we want to reduce this number. Yeah. So in the future, we've already outlined working with partners where we hope to reduce 20% in the value chain. If they are a supplier who works with us, we want to reduce their CO2 emissions and carbon footprint by 20% of what's on paper now. In our own production processes, we want to reduce this by 80%. And in our products and services to the customer, we want to reduce this by 50%. So like every single car that we have on the road, cumulatively, we will have technologies that will help us reduce all across the board. So that's exploring new technologies like electric vehicles, hydrogen, and so forth. And the funny thing is, like, the strategy itself has been around for so long that, that between 2006 and 2020, and I'm reading a report here, we've managed to minus 38% of energy consumption from every single vehicle that we produce. Yeah. And then 78% of CO2 emissions per vehicle that we produce, and 82% in terms of the waste that's disposed from the creation of the products and services, and of course 31% in terms of the water that's consumed to build these vehicles. And now I'm able to say all these numbers out because it's tracked. It's tracked, it's reported on a yearly basis, and that, I think, it's the fundamental of where we start and where we need to go. So the idea is, and this is learning from an organization that has a clear commitment that where they want to go in terms of CO2 reductions, and where in terms of reducing their carbon footprint, and getting onto this agenda. This I wouldn't say it's a bandwagon. I think it's the carriage is already moving. Yeah. So the idea is, I think it's a movement and a revolution within the industry. Yeah.
That's really interesting, which I think we've now heard the example, but let's probably move to you, James, in terms of working, or you have handled quite a number of organizations, and you have mentioned about how they capture all these figures and matrices in the report. And TCFD, one of the requirement is to disclose metrics and in your report. So I think, putting those numbers in the report means that they need to have data. So in your observation, from all your experience working with all these companies that disclose these matrices in their report, what would be the challenges, and how they started, and over the years, and something that perhaps you can advise the audience in terms of getting on board with this journey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. So in terms of sort of some general remarks about sort of where do I see the importance of climate information within the corporate reporting framework, it's absolutely front and center. And obviously I'm talking not exclusively, but particularly from a UK and European perspective, being based in the UK. But climate information and climate risk, whether it be qualitative or quantitative, absolutely this type of information is and has been front and center for, particularly for UK listed businesses, for probably around a decade. And that is certainly increased in that time. So if you were to open an annual report now, so one of the 2021 reports, you would probably see, like, so I was just for context, so prior to joining Black Sun as Sustainability Director in January of this year, I was working in-house at EasyJet for a couple of years, sort of being working on carbon as the carbon manager and sort of taking a leading role for carbon reduction disclosure and reporting. And if I think about that report that I helped to put together, the sustainability chapter, which is the most recent annual report, you'll see carbon, climate risk, opportunity associated with climate as well. You'll see that content sprinkled throughout the strategic report. So that's often referred to as the front end of the annual report. And that would have been content in the chairman's statement, in the chief executive statement, in other elements of the strategic report. So there's a dedicated chapter there as well. And also that would also extend to risk. So in the principal risks and uncertainties, there is content there, as there would be in many organizations, risk section about these issues, whether it be from the perspective of disruption and about the impacts potentially on business continuity, the ability of that organization to deliver the existing products and services that it offers. I guess it would be rather strange if you didn't see at least one principal risk or uncertainty that was related to climate change, climate risk, etc. And the maturity of the narrative is really somewhat driven by the competence, the capacity of the teams that work in-house in those organizations. And also the maturity of that narrative will perhaps be demonstrated by the articulation of not only the physical risks, but also about the transition risks. So the impacts about policy and legislation and the likes are going to have on reporting. But certainly from my own experience of working in-house and being around working for the world's largest travel and tourism business, TUI, around 9 years ago, here in the UK, we've had a series of carbon-related legislation and policy that's required large listed businesses to disclose an ever-increasing amount of complex information from the qualitative and the quantitative perspective. So mandatory carbon reporting requirements installed in law 9 years ago in 2013. They required for the first time that businesses had to disclose their carbon footprint. Scope 1 and 2, Catherine mentioned about some of the scopes earlier. So they had to do that. They had to record and disclose a carbon KPI based on intensity or a relative performance metric. So the amount of widgets that you manufacture and how many tons you would emit to do that. And in the case of a travel and tourism business, often it will be the emissions per passenger kilometer from an airline. In Sashi's business, it might be emissions per unit of production or something like that. And then there was, in the UK, we've had the streamlined energy carbon reporting requirements of 2019. So then that required additional elements of disclosure, including, can you tell us about what you've been doing to improve your energy efficiency across your operations in the last reporting period? And obviously then we've had TCFD, and I've got some statistics that I'll share with you shortly. And so the breadth, depth and complexity for preparers of annual reports and disclosure has just increased massively. And we've seen the New York Stock Exchange consult on a 500-page document about 4 to 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago now, about including climate. And so it is everywhere at present.
So actually, we are starting in Malaysia, and the Stock Exchange of Malaysia just closed the consultation on the climate reporting to be incorporated in the report of the public listed entities in Malaysia. So the consultation has closed, I think, recently, 22nd May. So we've yet to see what would be the final requirement into the listing requirement of the Stock Exchange. So, and the central bank also has issued the intention to adopt TCFD in the reporting of the banks. So, but of course, before you report, you have to start doing something. That's really very important. And I do have a lot of more questions, but I think it's best for me to take the question from the audience, from the floor. So perhaps if the organizing committee can share with us the questions from the audience. Yes, so we can see here with the 17 votes, the question on working from home to be one of the core behavioral changes for organization in achieving net zero emission by 2050. Yeah, it's very interesting because that probably reduce the amount of transportation that we have to take, and also perhaps this also can contribute in terms of the effort. So perhaps any of you would like to take this? Perhaps Sashi?
Well, from my perspective, I think when you do these sort of calculations, yes, I believe, well, it's not proven. I do believe that there are some savings in terms of carbon footprint by working from home, but you also need to also understand that energy usage, and the company that you work with, the organization that you work with, uh, you know when you're working in the office or whether you're working at home, I think the energy generation and the carbon footprint, I think the changes there are quite mild. I think it's more in the production, or in my experience, it's more in the actual work that you do in the organization, where what the company stands for, what it builds, its vehicles, like in the case of BMW. So behavioral changes, yes, of course, it plays a very important element. But I think in this conversation also, just circling back to what we were speaking earlier, I think it's also important for us to the questions that we ask in terms of how do we reduce carbon footprint or CO2 emissions within our organization and processes. It's a difficult question to ask and to actually answer. So we actually require organizations that are experts in this area. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for us at BMW,
So,
we work,
yeah.
we
So I
work
think,
at the
sorry,
science-based
Sashi. Sorry, Sashi, I think you are right. I just want to take out your point just now. Actually, it goes back to materiality, which, of course, there are so many initiatives we can do, and individually we can take all these initiatives. But for organization, it goes back in terms of, as I mentioned, which one is the highest in terms of the impact as well as the risk to your organization. So perhaps, Sashi, if you don't mind, I probably go to Catherine and James in terms of their opinion on this, and also relate it back to how material is that for your organization in terms of your carbon footprint. Yep.
Sorry. I'll make a quick comment on this, because this was actually kind of wildly debated in my own organization and through the sustainability lens, and that is, and what it came down to was, working from home, is that really good for the environment versus everyone, commuting into the office? But the flip side is that you've got, let's say 100 people all running their electricity at home, and the fact is that commercial facilities tend to be a lot more efficient. We have censored lightings here, and for me to warm my home is not efficient at all. So that would be my only comment, trying to directly answer this question from what I can see. But I'll hand over to James to provide a more intelligent response.
Well, no, I mean, I would echo everything you said, and as a small and medium-sized enterprise as we are, and based in the Greater London area, a lot of our colleagues are sort of commuting for around 1 hour by principally public transport, because of the nature of a big city in the UK. But I take your point that it is more efficient generally to have people there. But obviously the world has changed in light of the pandemic, and I think this is something that you can engage your people on. I think Catherine, you talked about this earlier. and maybe I'm sort of slightly paraphrasing, but obviously there are hearts and minds to be won within your own organization about, you know, what is the story of your own organization? What are you doing? But I think this is definitely an element of a contributory factor, but it's probably fairly modest versus some much bigger changes if you're in, you know, the type of business that Sashi's.
Can we look at another question? I'm conscious of time, and I think we do have a lot more questions. So the next one is, what are the top three economic transformation and societal adjustment that Malaysia needs to undertake now to reach net zero by 2050? Yeah, perhaps we can learn from the experience and the journey of other countries. Maybe James, you like to comment on that and share your experience from the UK, and Catherine to share experience from the Australia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess it's worth noting, and I don't know how widely known this is to your audience, but the UK was one of the first, if not the first, governments, and we had our Prime Minister Theresa May, previous Prime Minister. So around 3 years ago, she committed the UK to a net zero pathway by 2050 or earlier. So that commitment was made in the summer of 2019, and that is now enshrined in law. We have the Committee on Climate Change, which is the body that holds the government to account on the progress that it is making, and carbon budgets are essentially created every few years. We have in the UK democratic sort of government process, we have what are called select committees that are there really to challenge and to scrutinize the policies and the progress that government is making, and the Committee on Climate Change is very much in that place. I mean, I guess with the changes in obviously we're in a very different place now with regards to energy cost, and we talk about here in the UK and in Europe the cost of living crisis, and that is just accelerating the dash to install more and greater capacity for renewables. And so our grid electricity factor, so the average emissions per kilowatt hour, has been tumbling down in the right direction for a number of years, driven by the economics now of the pricing of renewables. So I guess that's very much the sort of the big picture from the government perspective. And that is driving ultimately the behavior of people wanting to then embrace electric vehicles in their own domestic situations. We're very slow at doing this, but we're starting to move towards a hydrogen solution for transportation, generally mainly for larger transport, commercial transport rather than individual transport. But I'd say those are just a couple of remarks from here in the UK, and I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, so Kath, I think that is also very interesting because Australia has got a new government, and I think among my peers, one of the conversation is about the new government's initiative and policies on driving Australia towards net zero. And also probably I bring back the discussion on electronic vehicle. Here in Malaysia, I spoke to a few what we call colleagues, and they were talking about we don't have a policy yet on to stop the production of ICE, internal combustion engine for automotive. So those are what we call transition risks, because of sometimes we need policy to spur the speed and or to motivate people to move forward. So what's your experience in Australia?
Not very good, to be fair. Unfortunately, we were the laggards, or the wooden spoon awards at COP26. But listen, we've just had an election here, and I don't think climate change was mentioned at all much. But interestingly, the result was that the people of Australia have finally voted with their feet, and climate change was absolutely centre to those that were voted in. So that means we will have a more aggressive action on climate change. So it'll be 43% by 2030. But as far as the broader strategy goes, that's still to be released. But state by state here in Australia, they've been working very hard towards net zero, a transitionary of the grid, uptake of renewables. On the East Coast, there's been a lot more kind of policy around, electric vehicles, etc. So not to say that we're altogether terrible. We have been doing quite a lot. It's just been, we're a commodity-based export country that's been trying to preserve much of that. And listen, it's just going to be very interesting to see, how quickly a lot of that legislation hits our market, and we're telling everyone it's going to. So but we're very, very far behind in terms of reporting, particularly around climate. That's absolutely trailing. So we've got a lot to do in a very short period of time, to be frank, and it's going to be very tough and costly. So
Yep, thank
I
you.
wish I had better answers. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think taking the cue from the answers both you've given, actually, from my analysis and reading, for us to move forward in the country, there has to be a lot of collaboration. And I think Malaysia has put it forward that we need to go with what we call one nation, all nation. Everyone need to be together in the target to be net zero by 2050. And I think government is working on the roadmap that will lead everyone to that direction. And if the government has big picture roadmap, this is where each organization, each company need to also come up with their own roadmap that address their own risks and their own limitation, and to identify how we move forward within our own organization as well as together in the country. But I'm conscious of time, but let us take do we have another one last question? No? So, well, but before we conclude, perhaps I would like to invite each and every panelist to give your probably a few points of takeaway for the audience, and perhaps some advice as well. Last words from each of you.
Shall I go first?
Yes, please, Catherine.
Okay, thank you. Listen, from my point of view, as putting on my sustainability advisory hat, the message is to start now, start educating yourself around this, start understanding, what does an emissions profile mean to my business. A lot of the companies we are talking to for BDO are SME companies. They don't have big sustainability teams. So, talk to people, collaborate with people, as Sashi was saying, partner with people. We are doing the same. We're partnering with lots of people to bring in the insights and the expertise to really understand how we can approach this challenge, because it is complex and it's going to take time. So the earlier you start, the better.
Yep. Sashi?
I think the most important thing is it's not a competition. So I think organizations need to collaborate, with each other, for this end goal. It's not a competitive advantage for, to be one organization higher than the other, but also that, I think when you talk about sustainability and sustainable development, that conversation has been taking place like over more than 2 decades already. Yeah. And the solutions are there. Some organization, if you want to find out how organizations are doing it, there are organizations that are more progressive than others. So there's a lot of learnings. Yeah, there's a lot of, and it's all transparent. So you can actually learn from bigger organizations. You can learn from more developed mega cities. So the solutions are there. It's just to start and implement. That's it.
Yep. Yeah. So James, please share with us your few takeaway points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I guess just to echo Sashi's point about it is not a competition, and that's absolutely right. And about, business and society have to collaborate more. And I would say, certainly from my own perspective of working in-house for more than 15 years in sustainability teams, is about making sure that you're collaborating, not competing with in other departments internally. So if I think about the putting together of the information for the last annual report that I worked on, it brought together colleagues from public affairs, from communications, from investor relations, from finance, from risk, insurance, etc. the more collaborative, the more joined up that you are, you're just going to have a better overall output, and you'll be able to create a more clearer, holistic narrative about what is your business doing to help cut emissions, to manage risk, and ultimately to be a better longer term bet as an organization, perhaps as a listed business, and about seeing and turning climate risk into potential opportunity and competitive advantage, because you can see that you're making progress, and that you want to be around for the long term, and that you're committed. I mean, just a couple of last statistics for you. I was just checking today on the SBTi's website. There's more than 3,000 companies that are taking action, which is great. However, only just over 1,000 of those have got net zero commitments, and just under 1,500 have got science-based targets that have been ratified. So there's still a long way to go, but there's a lot of good practice out there, as Catherine's mentioned. So, seek out colleagues from your industry associations, from your professional membership bodies, and see what information you can acquire, because chances are that we're all on this journey, and somebody's probably a little bit ahead and somebody might be a little bit further behind, but we're all hopefully pulling in the same direction to try and get to a place where we are well below 2 degrees.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, James. And well, all participants, I think it's time for you to start your journey. As Sashi has mentioned, BMW has started like decades ago, and it has to be a collaborative effort. And James mentioned that it's all about us, and Catherine also mentioned that we should start. So I think with this session, I hope it spurs your intention and your commitment. It's all about us. It's all about us surviving together in this world. Thank you very much to all panelists, and over to you back to MC. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for your sharing, and we hope all the 850 delegates watching Concurrent Session 1 found it interesting. That incidentally ends Concurrent Session 1, a reminder to rate the sessions before we take a short break. Also, do visit the virtual exhibition booths and catch the interesting offers on hand. Also, an interesting button on the platform is the Fireside Chat button. This allows you to get more information on the ESG topics. Ladies and gentlemen, Concurrent Session 2A will begin at 3:45 p.m. and is brought to you by ACCA. I shall check in with you at 3:45.